The California sun was relentless. It poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the pristine accessory dwelling unit, the ADU, that sat like a designer birdcage in the backyard of Tyler and Harper's $3 million Calabasas estate. Nancy sat in a beige linen armchair that she hadn't picked out, drinking a green smoothie she didn't want. "It's spirulina, Mom. Antioxidants." Harper's voice drifted through the open sliding glass door, carrying that hyper-enthusiastic pitch she reserved for her Instagram followers. Out by the infinity pool, Harper was adjusting a ring light, her perfectly manicured hands framing a bottle of organic sunscreen. "You have to take care of your body, right, guys? Link in bio." Nancy, 68, took a small sip of the bitter green sludge and set it on the marble coaster. She missed her old house in the Midwest. She missed the smell of pine, the creak of her wooden porch, and most of all, she missed her independence. But a year ago, after a mild heart palpitation and a cataract surgery, Tyler had flown out and packed up her life. "You're coming to live with us, Mom," he had insisted, wearing a tailored suit that looked too expensive for a freelance investment broker. "We built the guest house just for you. No more shoveling snow, no more paying bills. I'll handle everything. You just relax." It sounded like paradise. But over the last 12 months, the paradise had slowly tightened its grip. First, it was the mail. Tyler had rerouted her USPS deliveries to a P.O. box, claiming there was a surge of identity theft in the neighborhood. Then, it was her smartphone. Harper had set up a new family plan, installing a host of tracking apps under the guise of safety features. "Just in case you wander off or fall, Nancy, we'd be devastated," Harper had said, her eyes wide with manufactured concern. Nancy wasn't senile. For 35 years, she had been the head bookkeeper for a mid-sized lumber company. She had balanced ledgers down to the final cent. She knew the difference between gross margins and net profits. But she was a mother, and mothers have a fatal blind spot when it comes to their children. She had surrendered her autonomy because she wanted to believe her son was taking care of her. Until Tuesday. It was trash day. The estate's massive recycling bins had been dragged to the curb by the landscapers, but a sudden gust of wind had tipped one over, scattering junk mail across the pristine driveway. Nancy, preferring to make herself useful rather than sit idle, went out to pick it up. As she gathered glossy catalogs and empty Amazon boxes, a distinct standard-issue white envelope caught her eye. It was half stuck to the inside of a discarded pizza box. It had been opened, the top edge roughly torn, and then tossed away. Nancy pulled it free. Her name was printed behind the cellophane window. Nancy E. Miller. She slid the paper out. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a 1099-INT form, a tax document reporting interest income. Nancy scanned the boxes with the trained mechanical eye of an auditor. Box 1, interest income. The number printed there was $14,500. For a savings account to generate $14,000 in pure interest in a single fiscal year, the principal balance had to be massive. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the bank listed at the top of the form, Crestview Equity and Trust, was an institution Nancy had never done business with in her entire life. She stared at the paper, the California heat suddenly feeling like ice against her skin. This wasn't a mistake. The Social Security number on the form was hers. The address was hers. Someone had opened a massive high-yield account in her name, generating taxable income that the IRS would hold her responsible for, and whoever did it had thrown the evidence in the trash. Nancy folded the paper into a tiny, sharp square and slipped it into the pocket of her cardigan. She didn't confront Tyler when he came home in his sleek black Tesla. She didn't mention it when Harper brought over a plate of seared salmon for dinner. A bookkeeper knows that when the numbers don't add up, you don't ask the suspect. You look at the ledger. Nancy knew her phone was monitored. Tyler had kindly set up her Apple ID, meaning her text messages and call logs were likely synced to his iPad in the main house. The next morning at 10 a.m., Nancy walked into her small kitchenette, turned the sink faucet on full blast to create white noise, and used her iPad to open an incognito browser. She didn't send a text. Instead, she logged into a shared Pinterest board. An old account she and her daughter Jess had used years ago to plan Thanksgiving dinners. Under a picture of an apple pie recipe, Nancy left a comment. Thinking of making this today, I seem to be missing the main ingredient. Can you drop by at noon? It was a long shot, but Jess was sharp. 34 years old, pragmatic to a fault, and working as a risk assessment analyst for an insurance firm in downtown LA, Jess never quite bought into Tyler's flashy lifestyle. "He's all hat and no cattle, Mom," Jess used to say. At exactly 12:15 p.m., a modest Honda Civic pulled into the circular driveway, parking right next to Tyler's Tesla. Jess walked into the ADU carrying a bag of Granny Smith apples to keep up the charade. She wore a sharp blazer and sensible flats, her eyes scanning the room before she spoke. "Harper's at a Pilates class, and Tyler is on a Zoom call in his office," Jess said quietly, setting the apples on the counter. She looked at her mother. "You never bake on Wednesdays. What's wrong?" Nancy didn't say a word. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the folded 1099-INT form, and flattened it on the marble island. Jess leaned in. Her eyes darted across the numbers. The practical, businesslike demeanor vanished, replaced by a deep, tight frown. "Crestview Equity? Mom, you bank with Chase. Where did this come from?" "Tyler's recycling bin," Nancy said, her voice barely a whisper. "Jess, I haven't seen a bank statement in 8 months. Tyler said he put everything in a blind trust to avoid probate taxes. I trusted him." Jess's jaw tightened. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out her personal laptop. "We are not using his Wi-Fi." She pulled out her phone, switched on a cellular hotspot, and connected her laptop. "If there's an account this big in your name, it's attached to your credit profile." For 10 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the room was the rapid clacking of Jess's fingernails against the keyboard. Nancy watched her daughter's face. She saw the exact moment the bottom fell out. Jess stopped typing. The color drained from her cheeks. "Mom," Jess breathed, turning the screen around. It was a digital copy of a public county record, a legal document. "What am I looking at?" Nancy asked, adjusting her reading glasses. "It's a durable financial power of attorney," Jess said, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. "Filed 11 months ago. It gives Tyler complete, unchecked legal authority to open accounts, take out loans, liquidate assets, and manage real estate in your name." Nancy stared at the digital signature at the bottom of the page. It looked like hers. "I never signed this. I swear to you, Jess, I never—" Nancy stopped. The memory hit her like a physical blow. 11 months ago, the waiting room at the eye clinic. Her vision had been blurred from the dilating drops. Tyler had rushed in, smelling of expensive cologne and cheap coffee, holding a clipboard. "Mom, they need these release forms signed before the surgeon will take you. It's just the medical power of attorney. Standard stuff in case there's an emergency under anesthesia. Sign here, here, and here. Quick, they're calling your name." He had shuffled the papers. She couldn't read the fine print because of the eye drops. She had signed exactly where his manicured finger had pointed. "He slipped it into the medical stack," Nancy whispered, the betrayal tasting like ash in her mouth. "He stole my financial life while I was sitting in a hospital gown." Jess slammed the laptop shut. "Grab your coat. We are going to the police. This is elder abuse. It's fraud. It's—" "No!" The word cracked through the room, sharp and authoritative. It wasn't the voice of a fragile old woman. It was the voice of the head bookkeeper who had stared down IRS audits without blinking. Jess froze. "Mom, he has total control. We have to stop him. If we go to the police right now—" "What do we have?" Nancy said, her eyes narrowing. "A legal document with my actual signature on it. Tyler will say I'm getting forgetful. He'll say he opened that account to protect my assets. He will drain whatever money is left, hide it in offshore crypto wallets, and I will be left with nothing." Nancy looked out the window. Across the manicured lawn, the main house stood like a fortress. "He thinks I'm a foolish old woman who doesn't understand modern banking," Nancy said softly, turning back to the kitchen island. "But numbers leave a trail, Jess. They always do. I don't just want to stop him. I want to know exactly what he took, where he put it, and how to get every single cent back. Jess stared at her mother, seeing a cold, calculated strength she hadn't witnessed since her father passed away. Slowly, Jess let go of her coat. She opened the laptop again. "Okay," Jess whispered, a dangerous edge creeping into her voice. "Where do we start?" "We start," Nancy said, tapping the 1099-INT form, "by finding out what else my dear son is hiding in the dark." A bookkeeper's greatest weapon isn't a calculator. It is patience. For the next 3 weeks, Nancy played the role of the docile, grateful mother perfectly. She drank Harper's terrible green smoothies. She smiled when Tyler patted her on the shoulder and told her not to worry her pretty little head about the rising cost of living. But the moment the main house went quiet, Nancy went to work. She had asked Jess to bring her a simple black moleskin notebook and a fine point pen. This became her shadow ledger. Nancy sat by the window of her ADU, partially hidden by the sheer curtains, watching the driveway and listening. On Tuesday, a delivery van pulled up. Harper emerged, squealing for her Instagram Live, unboxing a pristine chalk-white Chanel Classic flap bag. Nancy recognized the caviar leather and gold hardware. She had seen it in a magazine at the dentist's office. In her notebook, under the liabilities column, Nancy wrote, May 14th, Chanel handbag. Estimated retail, $10,200. 2 days later, the facade of Tyler's successful brokerage began to crack. Nancy was watering the hydrangeas near Tyler's home office window when she heard his voice. It wasn't his usual smooth, arrogant baritone. It was shrill, panicked. "What do you mean liquidated?" Tyler hissed into his phone, pacing furiously across the Persian rug inside. He loosened his silk tie, his face flushed. "You can't margin call me now. The Ethereum merges next week. It's going to bounce back. I just need an extension." "Hello? Hello?" Tyler threw his phone against the leather sofa. He looked like a man drowning in a very expensive ocean. Nancy carefully stepped back from the window. In her notebook, she wrote, May 16th, crypto margin call, severe liquidity crisis. That Sunday, Jess came over under the pretense of helping her mother organize old photo albums. Once the door was locked and the blinds were drawn, Jess pulled out her laptop. She had spent the week digging through public county records and soft pull credit inquiries, using her expertise as a risk analyst. "Okay, Mom, you were right," Jess said, her voice grim. She turned the screen to face Nancy. "Tyler didn't just drain the cash from the sale of your Ohio house. He weaponized your credit score." Nancy put on her reading glasses, staring at the dense spreadsheet. "Explain it to me." "Tyler's personal credit is garbage," Jess explained, tracing a line on the screen with her pen. "He's over-leveraged on margin debt from crypto trading. So 11 months ago, using that fraudulent power of attorney, he added your name to the title of his Calabasas house." Nancy frowned. "Why would he give me part of his house?" "He didn't give you anything. He used your pristine 8,400 credit score as a shield," Jess said, her eyes flashing with anger. "The minute your name was on the deed, he applied for a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, using your financial history as the primary guarantor. Mom," he pulled out $400,000. The air in the small room felt suddenly thin. $400,000. It was the culmination of 40 years of Nancy's early mornings, skipped vacations, and meticulous saving. Gone, tied to a house of cards. "And if he defaults on his crypto loans?" Nancy asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "The bank forecloses on this estate," Jess said softly. "And because your name is on the HELOC, they will come after whatever is left of your pension to cover the deficit. He's sinking, Mom, and he's chained you to the anchor." Nancy didn't cry. She didn't scream. She looked down at her black moleskin notebook, running her thumb over the leather cover. "Where is the money now, Jess?" "I don't know," Jess admitted, frustrated. "I can see the credit line, but I can't see the routing numbers. Tyler uses a heavily encrypted password manager. Unless we get into his physical office and find the master password or his hardware ledger, We have no proof of where the funds were transferred. Nancy looked out the window. Men in white overalls were currently setting up massive white tents and string lights around the infinity pool. Harper is throwing her annual white party this Saturday, Nancy said smoothly. 300 guests. Open bar. Loud music. Tyler's office is in the East Wing, right past the caterer's prep kitchen. Jess stared at her mother, a slow, adrenaline-laced smile spreading across her face. Mom, are you suggesting we rob your own son? I'm suggesting, Nancy corrected, that we conduct an unannounced internal audit. Saturday night in Calabasas was a suffocating display of wealth. The bass from the DJ booth vibrated through the soles of Nancy's sensible cream-colored flats. Everywhere she looked, influencers and local minor celebrities drifted around the pool like ghosts in their mandatory all-white attire. Nancy stood near the massive marble kitchen island, nursing a sparkling water. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her face was a mask of pleasant grandmotherly boredom. Across the room, Jess blended into the crowd perfectly in a sharp white blazer and matching trousers. They made eye contact. Nancy gave a microscopic nod. Go. Jess slipped away from the main floor, weaving through the chaos of the catering staff carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. She pushed through the swinging doors into the quiet, dimly lit East Wing hallway. Tyler's office door was heavy mahogany. As expected, it was locked. But Jess had spent her teenage years sneaking out of the house. She pulled a rigid, laminated plastic card from her blazer pocket, a hotel key card she kept for emergencies, and jammed it into the door jamb, wiggling it against the slanted latch. With a soft click, the door gave way. Jess slipped inside and locked the door behind her. The office smelled of stale scotch and desperation. Tyler's custom iMac was on the desk, but it was asleep and password protected. Jess didn't bother with it. She knew guys like Tyler. They trusted software to protect their digital lives, but they always kept physical backups because they were terrified of getting locked out. She began pulling drawers. First, the mahogany filing cabinet. Locked. She moved to the desk. The top drawers yielded nothing but expensive pens and luxury watch boxes. Think, Jess. Think, she muttered to herself. If the digital world crashes, where is the key? She dropped to her knees and ran her hands under the heavy desk. Her fingers brushed against something hard taped to the underside of the central drawer. She ripped it free. It was a small, black, external hard drive, and taped to it was a sticky note with a 12-word seed phrase, the master recovery key for a cryptocurrency wallet. Jess pulled her laptop from her oversized white clutch, plugged the hard drive in, and her eyes widened. It wasn't just crypto. It was PDF copies of every bank statement, every wire transfer, every offshore LLC he had set up. The holy grail of his financial crimes. She immediately initiated a file transfer to her secure cloud server. Progress bar, 15%. Back in the living room, the situation was deteriorating. Nancy watched Tyler checking his gold Rolex. He looked stressed, sweating through his white linen suit. He muttered something to Harper, who was busy taking a selfie, and pointed toward the East Wing. He's going to the office, Nancy realized, a spike of cold terror hitting her chest. He needs to hide from his creditors, or he needs a drink. Tyler began pushing through the crowd. He was 50 feet away from the hallway, then 40. Nancy had to act. She looked to her left. A waiter was balancing a massive silver tray loaded with tall glasses of deep, blood-red blackberry sangria. Nancy didn't hesitate. She stepped directly into the waiter's blind spot and executed a flawless, seemingly accidental trip. She collided hard with the waiter. The silver tray tipped. Time seemed to slow down. 3 glasses of dark red sangria launched into the air and crashed directly onto Harper's custom-made $8,000 white silk gown. The scream Harper let out was loud enough to stop the DJ's music. "My dress, my Valentino!" Harper shrieked, staring in absolute horror at the dark, spreading stains that looked like a crime scene on her pristine gown. The entire party turned to look. Tyler, who was only 10 feet away from the East Wing hallway, spun around. Seeing his wife having a public meltdown, he cursed and sprinted back toward the kitchen. "Harper, calm down. People are recording." "Oh my goodness, I am so incredibly clumsy. I am so sorry," Nancy gasped, putting a hand over her mouth, playing the frail, embarrassed old woman to perfection. In the office, Jess heard the muffled shriek. She checked the screen. Progress bar, 98%, 99%, 100%. Transfer complete. Jess yanked the hard drive out, taped it exactly back under the desk where she found it, and practically flew to the door. She unlocked it, slipped into the hallway, and seamlessly merged with a group of caterers rushing toward the commotion in the living room. When Jess reached the kitchen, Nancy was still apologizing profusely to a hyperventilating Harper, while Tyler frantically dabbed at the silk with a club soda-soaked napkin. Jess walked up beside her mother, her face entirely neutral. She gently put an arm around Nancy's shoulders. "Mom, are you okay? You look pale," Jess said smoothly. "Let's get you back to the guest house. I think you've had enough excitement for one night." "Yes," Nancy whispered, looking down at the red stains on the floor, a tiny, undetectable smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "I think it's time to call it a night." As they walked out into the cool California air, leaving the chaos behind them, Jess squeezed her mother's arm. "I got it," Jess whispered. "I got everything." Nancy didn't look back at the mansion. "Good. Now we build the gallows." The morning after the white party, the Calabasas estate was dead quiet. The catering crews had vanished, leaving only a few deflated white balloons floating sadly in the infinity pool. Inside the ADU, however, the air was crackling with electric tension. Jess sat cross-legged on the floor, her laptop connected to a secure VPN, parsing through the decrypted files from Tyler's hidden hard drive. Nancy sat beside her, a fresh cup of black coffee cooling on the side table, her black moleskin notebook open in her lap. "It's worse than we thought," Jess said, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. She rubbed her eyes and turned the screen toward her mother. "He didn't just borrow against your house, Mom. He threw it into a wood chipper." Nancy put on her glasses and leaned in. She didn't need a finance degree to read the red numbers bleeding across the Excel spreadsheets. To a bookkeeper, a ledger tells a story more intimately than a diary ever could. "Look at this column." Jess pointed to a series of massive outbound wire transfers to a cryptocurrency exchange platform. Tyler was trading on margin. He borrowed heavily to buy Ethereum and Bitcoin right before the market crashed. When the prices tanked, the brokers issued margin calls. He had to cover the losses immediately or lose everything. That's why he panicked and opened the $400,000 HELOC in your name. Nancy traced the screen with a trembling finger. "And where did the rest of it go? He didn't put $400,000 into crypto." "No," Jess sighed, clicking open a folder labeled HA Lifestyle. "He put the rest of it into Harper, the screen filled with invoices, not business investments, but the desperate, hollow costs of maintaining an illusion. $30,000 to a boutique PR agency to get Harper featured in a minor fashion magazine. $5,000 a month to a follower farm in Eastern Europe to artificially inflate her Instagram engagement. The Chanel bags, the leased Tesla, the organic catering, none of it was paid for by brand deals. It was all funded by Nancy's stolen retirement and the phantom equity of her stolen home. Nancy sat back in her chair, a heavy, visceral ache blooming in her chest. She remembered Tyler as a 9-year-old boy, sitting at the kitchen table in Ohio, carefully counting the quarters from his piggy bank so he could buy her a birthday card. He had been so proud of those coins. He had looked at her with eyes full of bright, honest ambition. Where had that boy gone? "He's terrified," Nancy whispered, the anger momentarily giving way to a profound, crushing sorrow. "He built a life out of paper, Jess, and he was so afraid of the wind blowing it down that he used my life to weigh it down." Jess reached out and squeezed her mother's hand. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I know he's your son." "He was my son," Nancy corrected softly, her voice hardening. The sorrow was real, but the bookkeeper inside her was furious. "Right now he is a liability, and we need to close the account." For the next 2 hours, they built a timeline of the fraud. But as Nancy scrolled through the bank statements, her eyes, trained by decades of hunting down missing pennies in corporate ledgers, caught an anomaly. "Stop," Nancy commanded, tapping the screen. "Go back to the March statement, the outbound transfers." Jess scrolled back. "What is it?" "Look at the dates," Nancy said, her brow furrowing. Tyler was hemorrhaging money to the crypto exchange on the 12th and the 15th to cover his margin calls. He was desperate for liquidity. But on the 18th, there's a wire transfer of $50,000 out of the HELOC to an LLC called Aegis Consulting, and another $50,000 in April. Jess frowned. Maybe it's another one of his shell companies? A desperate man doesn't hide cash when his broker is threatening to liquidate his assets, Nancy stated flatly. A desperate man spends it to survive. Tyler didn't make those transfers. Jess's fingers flew across the keyboard. She ran a quick search of the hard drive for Aegis Consulting. A single buried email thread popped up. It wasn't from Tyler's account. It was a forwarded email from Harper's private iCloud. Jess opened it. The silence in the room grew deafening. It was correspondence with a high-end divorce attorney and an offshore asset manager in the Cayman Islands. "Oh my God," Jess breathed, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief. Harper isn't just an airhead influencer. She knows exactly how much debt Tyler is in. She's siphoning the HELOC, Nancy realized, the pieces clicking together with terrifying precision. She's setting up an offshore trust, Jess read quickly from the emails. She is draining the last of the available credit you have left, moving it to an account Tyler doesn't know about. She's filing for divorce at the end of the month. She's going to claim she knew nothing about his crypto gambling, take the stashed cash, and leave Tyler and you to face the bank foreclosure alone. The sheer sociopathy of it was breathtaking. Harper wasn't just wearing the stolen money. She was preparing to detonate the entire family and walk away from the blast radius. "There's something else," Jess said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She had opened the master PDF file of the original $400,000 HELOC loan agreement. "Mom, the bank approved this massive line of credit. But even with a power of attorney, a bank usually requires the primary account holder to be physically present or have the documents heavily notarized for a loan this size." Jess zoomed in on the final page of the loan contract. There on the dotted line was Nancy's signature. Next to it was the dark official stamp of a local notary public. Nancy leaned close to the screen. She stared at the loops of the N and the slant of the Y. "I didn't sign that," Nancy said coldly. "Are you sure?" Jess asked. "Could it be from the medical paperwork he tricked you into signing?" "No," Nancy said, pointing at the screen. "I always cross the A in Nancy with a slight upward flick. I've done it since I was 20 years old. This line is straight. And look at the date. October 14th. I was in bed with a terrible flu that week. I never left this guest house, and I certainly didn't sit in front of a notary." Jess sat back, the gravity of the discovery washing over her. "The power of attorney was unethical," Jess said slowly. "But this, forging a signature on a federally backed bank loan and bribing a dirty notary to stamp it, that crosses the line from a civil family dispute to a Class B felony. This is wire fraud and bank fraud. Mom, Tyler could go to federal prison for a decade." Nancy looked out the window. The California sun was still shining, but the gilded cage felt colder than ever. Her son was a felon, and her daughter-in-law was a predator preparing to strike. Time was up. "Jess," Nancy said, her voice completely devoid of hesitation, "pack up your laptop. We are not playing defense anymore." "What are we doing?" Jess asked, closing the screen. "Harper is planning to cut the parachute at the end of the month," Nancy said, standing up and smoothing her cardigan. "We are going to burn the plane down tonight." Thursday evening arrived with a suffocating heat, the kind that makes the air in Southern California feel thick and heavy. Inside the formal dining room of the Calabasas estate, the crystal chandelier cast sharp, uncompromising light across the long mahogany table. Tyler sat at the head of the table, his knee bouncing beneath the polished wood. Harper sat to his right, mindlessly scrolling through her phone, annoyed that she had to cancel a dinner reservation at Nobu for a mandatory family meeting. Nancy sat opposite her son. Beside her sat Jess. Between the perfectly plated portions of roasted asparagus and prime rib, a thick, stapled document rested near Nancy's water glass. "It's just a standard tax update, Mom," Tyler said, his voice tight. He nudged a silver Mont Blanc pen toward her. "The CPA said we need it to optimize the trust before the quarter ends. Just sign the back page. A quitclaim deed. It's a formality." A quitclaim deed. The legal instrument used to quickly transfer real estate interest. Tyler was drowning in margin debt, and his final desperate move was to remove his mother's name from the deed entirely so he could liquidate the property before the bank seized it. Nancy didn't pick up the pen. She picked up her cloth napkin, dabbed her mouth, and looked at her son. "I don't think I will be signing that, Tyler," Nancy said evenly. Tyler's knee stopped bouncing. A flash of irritation crossed his face. "Mom, please, let's not make a big deal out of paperwork. Just sign it so we can eat." "I have made a career out of paperwork," Nancy replied, her tone dropping 10 degrees. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out the black moleskin notebook. She placed it squarely on the mahogany table. "For instance, I was reviewing the paperwork for a $400,000 home equity line of credit taken out against my pristine credit score on October 14th. The silence that fell over the dining room was absolute. Harper stopped scrolling. Tyler's face went completely bloodless. "Mom, what are you talking about? Jess, what did you tell her?" "Jess didn't tell me," Nancy said smoothly. "The numbers told me. A bookkeeper knows a bleeding ledger when she sees one. You didn't secure my future, Tyler. You used my 8,400 credit score as a bulletproof vest while you gambled on Ethereum margin calls." "It was an investment." Tyler slammed his hand on the table, the wine glasses rattling. The charming, successful broker facade instantly evaporated, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. "The market tanked. It was temporary. I was going to pay it back before you ever found out." "By forging my signature?" Nancy asked, her voice cracking like a whip. "You bribed a notary to stamp a federal bank loan while I was in bed with the flu. That isn't a bad investment, Tyler. That is a Class B felony." Harper's eyes darted between Tyler and Nancy. "Tyler, what is she talking about? Did you forge bank documents?" Jess leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. She looked directly at her sister-in-law. "Don't act shocked, Harper. You've known about the debt for months." Harper's manicured hand tightened around her phone. "Excuse me? I have absolutely nothing to do with Tyler's business accounts." "That's true." Jess smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "But you do have a lot to do with Aegis Consulting, don't you?" Harper's face froze. The color drained from her perfectly bronzed cheeks. Tyler looked confused. "Aegis? Who is Aegis?" "It's an offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands," Jess explained, sliding a printed copy of an email across the table toward Tyler. "Your wife has been siphoning $50,000 a month from the fraudulent HELOC you opened. She's moving the cash out of the country, retaining a high-powered divorce attorney, and planning to leave you holding the bag of federal fraud before the bank forecloses next month." Tyler stared at the paper. He read the emails. He read the Cayman routing numbers. His breathing grew shallow, ragged. He slowly turned his head to look at his wife. "You're draining the accounts?" Tyler whispered, his voice vibrating with pure, unadulterated rage. "I committed wire fraud to keep a roof over your head, and you are stealing the money to run?" "You're a failure, Tyler!" Harper shrieked, jumping up from her chair crashing to the floor behind her. The influencer mask was gone, revealing the ruthless opportunist underneath. "You lost everything. You think I'm going down with you? You think I'm going to live in a 2-bedroom apartment because you're a crypto gambling idiot? I bought you those bags. I leased your car," Tyler roared, standing up and throwing his wine glass at the wall. It shattered, red wine dripping down the pristine white paint like blood. Nancy sat perfectly still amid the screaming match. She watched the two of them tear each other to pieces, a fragile house of cards collapsing under the weight of its own greed. "Enough." Nancy's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the absolute authority of a judge in a courtroom. Both Tyler and Harper stopped, breathing heavily, glaring at her. "You are both parasites," Nancy said, standing up slowly. She buttoned her cardigan. "But the host is no longer available." Tyler let out a bitter, desperate laugh. He ran his hands through his hair, pacing like a caged tiger. "You think you won, Mom?" Tyler sneered, pointing a shaking finger at her. "If you go to the police, the bank will accelerate the loan. They will seize this house. They will seize the rest of your pension. If I go down, you end up on the street. You have to sign the quitclaim deed so I can sell the house and settle the debt privately." Nancy looked at her son. There was no motherly warmth left in her eyes, only the cold, unyielding gaze of an auditor who had found the missing funds. "You are assuming we are going to the police today," Nancy said softly. Tyler stopped pacing. "What?" Jess picked up her phone and checked the time. "We didn't go to the local police, Tyler. A local precinct wouldn't understand the complexities of offshore crypto evasion and forged notary seals. So 3 days ago, I filed a comprehensive fraud alert with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau." Tyler's jaw dropped. "And," Nancy added smoothly, "I sent my shadow ledger, along with the proof of Harper's offshore tax evasion, directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS." As if on cue, Tyler's phone, resting on the table, began to vibrate wildly. The caller ID flashed. "Crestview Equity, urgent." "Pick it up, Tyler," Jess said calmly. "I imagine that's your broker calling to tell you that all your domestic accounts, including the HELOC and your remaining margin lines, were officially frozen by federal mandate at 5 p.m. today." Tyler stared at the vibrating phone as if it were a live grenade. Harper backed away against the wall, her hands over her mouth in sheer terror. You destroyed me," Tyler whispered, tears of panic finally spilling over his eyelashes. "Mom, how could you?" "I didn't destroy you," Nancy said, picking up her moleskin notebook. "I just balanced the ledger. The deficit is entirely yours." She turned and walked out of the dining room, her footsteps echoing sharply on the hardwood floor. Jess followed close behind. They didn't look back as Tyler finally answered the phone, his voice cracking as the reality of his federal indictment set in. 4 months later, the morning sun reflected off the glass of a modern, secure high-rise apartment in downtown Los Angeles. Nancy stood in her new kitchen. It was smaller than her old house in Ohio and miles away from the sprawling Calabasas estate, but it was bright, clean, and most importantly, it was hers. Because Nancy had proactively reported the fraud and proved the signature on the HELOC was forged, the bank's fraud department had cleared her of the debt. The Calabasas estate was in foreclosure. Tyler was currently awaiting trial for wire fraud, and Harper's offshore accounts had been seized by the IRS pending a massive tax evasion investigation. The buzzer to the apartment rang. Nancy pressed the intercom. "Come on up, Jess." A few minutes later, Jess walked in, holding a pink bakery box. "I brought croissants from that French place down the street." "How are you liking the new place, Mom?" "The security guard in the lobby actually checks IDs," Nancy smiled, taking the box. "And the Wi-Fi is entirely under my name. It's perfect." "I was thinking," Jess said as she leaned against the counter. "I need a new pair of shoes for work. Do you want to walk down to the plaza and go shopping?" Nancy opened her purse. She pulled out a sleek, dark blue Chase Sapphire credit card with her name printed clearly across the front. She hadn't asked anyone for permission. She didn't have to wait for an allowance. "Only if the coffee is on me," Nancy said, her eyes twinkling with a fierce, independent light. She slipped the card into her coat pocket, locked her own front door, and walked out into the sun.